I am also here today with my colleagues, Nadine Neute, Kevin Lind, and Stefan Kirsch from the Thüringer Kompetenznetzwerk Forschungsdatenmanagement, who are so kind and will support me today in this workshop. If you have any questions, technical issues, or anything else, please send them a message or send the message to the chat, and we'll try and get back to you as quickly as we can. Yeah, and I think this sort of concludes the housekeeping part, and we'll just start into this workshop with a little survey. It's a one-question survey, so it should be fairly quick. So if you would please click on the Mentimeter link that Kevin just posted in the chat, and just sort of answer this one question I got for you real quick. So basically the question is, what made you sign up for this workshop? Alrighty. Yeah, I think that's about it. Okay, so I'm not gonna share or like present the results. I'm just gonna tell you. So 32 of you said that you are here today and signed up for this workshop because of your general interest in the topic, which is great, wonderful. I'm happy to hear that. And 17 more of you said that you actually plan to publish data soon. So I hope this workshop will actually help you. But, and this is something that I was hoping, 9 of you also said it was because of the catchy title, and 12 of you said because it was of the workshop description, which is kind of my way of saying I've been trying with this title and description to do a little something that we're trying to do today, namely try to increase visibility and impact for your results or for your data with similar techniques. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that will work and get right into the workshop. Here we go. So a little overview of what we're going to do today. The welcome and introduction, we already got that behind us. So well done. Off to a good start. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what is data publication. What does that even mean? We are going to talk about why should we even publish data? What's the need for doing that? And then we will talk about where and how to publish data. This will be a fairly large section. Again, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. And we're going to have a short break of 15 minutes so that you can like go get a coffee, toilet break, whatever, have a breather. And then after the break, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ways to make your data publication more visible and impactful. And then we're going to have another short break. And then we will get to actually practice data publication in a selected repository. Today it's going to be Zenodo. Why is it going to be Zenodo? It's fairly simple because Zenodo has a so-called sandbox, which is sort of like a practice arena for these kinds of things. So anything we upload there will not be actually visible for the public, and the DOIs that we will create will not actually register or resolve. So it doesn't really matter what we do in the sandbox. We can just play around and practice a little bit. And then hopefully we'll take some questions, wrap up the workshop, and say goodbye. So that's our plan for today. All right, let's get started. Let me introduce to you who we actually are. I've seen a few familiar faces in the participants, but I'm already seeing a few ones that I cannot place. So for all of you who don't know us yet, we are the Thüringer Kompetenznetzwerk Forschungsdatenmanagement. And we consist of, I see Kevin's not on here yet. We consist of the 4 universities, Erfurt, Ilmenau, Jena, and Weimar, as well as the 4 universities of applied sciences, Erfurt, Jena, Nordhausen, and Schmalkalden. And we have a colleague sitting in each of those places, a few of which are here today as well. So these are the RDM contact points. And then we also have in our pilot project 2 data stewards. And they're here today as well. It's Kevin Lind, he's at TU Ilmenau, and Stefan Kirsch at the Jena. We also have a coordinator, that's Roman Gerlach, and have now become a fairly large network. You can find us at forschungsdaten-thüringen.de, as well as on the various social media channels and also on a Zenodo community that I've listed down below. We will send you the slides, by the way, after this workshop. They will also be publicly available on Zenodo, and the recording will be made publicly available on YouTube, so that you do not have to like record any of this if you don't want to. So you'll be sent everything that you need after the workshop. Okay. So what do we actually do? Our network has basically been in the business of raising awareness for data management since 2018, so for 6 years now. We do RDM consultations, we do trainings, events, networking, and we also do open educational resources and materials. So for example, fact sheets, best practice examples, research data scary tale, and the card game that's associated with it has become fairly popular. And we also have like our landmark events every year. That's the Thuringian RDM Days for one. Then we have the Fairest Dataset Award coming up actually now in the middle of February. And every semester we also do have generally like 4 to 5 coffee lectures every month, one of them. And there's another one coming up as well this February in a week, but I'll give the upcoming events at the end of the workshop as well if you want to stay with us and visit another of our events. So yeah, let's get right into the topic. What is data publication? In the RDM world, we do not consider like data in a point at a point of time. We consider data as part of a life cycle. So basically, what you see here is the research data life cycle. Starts with planning a project, a research endeavor, research and analysis. Then you store and archive your data and provide access to it, and publish the data, and then hopefully facilitate reuse, citations, and new collaborations with your published data. Now, where this workshop comes in is basically the fourth little part of the circle, the green one, publication and reuse. So today we're going to talk about how can we actually accomplish that, publish research data in a way that they become visible, impactful, that a lot of people cite them, and that they become like a hallmark of your career. So why should we do this? Why should we publish? There's several reasons for this, but I wanted to start this off with this lost data map that a colleague of mine draws. She does these fantastic little illustrations for research data management. So basically, the lost data map shows you where research data can get lost, basically. So my favorite personally is some retired professors draw right in the middle. But also stuff like the proprietary hole or the black versioning forest, the Excel desert, or the swarms of metadata. Basically, the meaning of this map is research data, if you don't manage them and if you don't publish them professionally, very easily get lost, or they lose their impact and their visibility very quickly if you don't actually do professional research data management. So this is the main motivation that me and my colleagues do what we do, and hopefully also the main motivation for you to publish your data. A more concrete example would be this next one. So a neuroscientist from Japan named Tsuyoshi Miyakawa from the Fujita Health University, and editor-in-chief to Molecular Brain and Neuropsychopharmacology Reports, which are both academic journals, published statistics on raw data requests that he was doing a little while back, in 2019, in fact. And why he was doing that was he wanted to show what happens when he requests data from his authors that submit publications. Now, he does this whenever he feels that results that are in a submitted journal article seem a little bit too beautiful to be true. It's like they seem a little bit too good. So what he does then is he writes someone an email and he says, okay, can I have a look at the raw data that are underlying this journal publication? And as you can see, like in the flowchart on the right-hand side, only one out of the 41 authors that he did this with for these two journals from December 2017 to September 2019 were actually able or willing to provide correct and sufficient raw data to support their journal publication, which is quite shocking, obviously. So only the one got then accepted. The other ones were not even willing to respond. They just sort of like vanished after the raw data request, or they flat out declined to provide the raw data at all. And the ones that did submit data, 19 of them, the data were found insufficient to support the article, or they didn't even match with the results that were described in the article. Now, why am I giving this example is because we obviously all have had this experience, or many of us may have had this experience, that we find an article and we think, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like it fits with my research, really interested in this. And then you want to have a look at the underlying data and they're either not there or you can't do anything with them. Now, this is another main motivation that I'm saying, okay, we would like to maybe change the way that we do publish data and the way that we do treat our data. Also, if you have no data, you have no reproducibility. All of you have probably heard of the reproducibility crisis that we do have in academia. Few examples here, cancer biology. So a study has found that 0% of 51 papers that were examined were reproducible without the input from the author. So 0% is not a lot, there's none of them. And that also sharing data or even the analysis code was not common. In AI research, only about 50% of reinforcement learning papers included any kind of code, and a study of publications found that only 40% of the papers were actually reproducible. Medical trials, data for about 50% were never made available in any way at all. And then about another 50% of the outcomes were not reported. And author-held data in medical trials, so data that authors hang on to without publishing them, are lost at about a 7% rate per annum, so per year. Which is quite a lot. So these are all like powerful motivators to maybe do a little bit differently. Because if we keep doing what we are doing in science and academia, we will have a loss of reputation due to the reduced credibility and transparency of our research results, which will make it easier to dismiss scientific findings that have bearings on societal change. For example, think about COVID research, or think about climate research, and so on and so forth. And also, overall, we will have a loss of trust in science as a whole. So this is another powerful reason as to why we should publish research data in a professional, efficient way. Now, we've heard, like, on the last 3 slides, like a lot of, doomsday scenarios and, like, why it's bad not to. So I thought I'd include a slide on why it is good to do it and what the benefits are for you, for your community, and for the general public as well. Because, yeah, I do realize research data management is an effort, like you have to invest some time, but there are benefits. Let's start with the benefits for the researcher, him or herself. So studies clearly show that publishing data increases your visibility, and that will in turn increase the citations that your paper and your data get. And as we all know, citations and visibility is sort of the currency in an academic career and will lead to more career recognition, which is definitely what you want. Not only that, published and visible data will also lead to new collaborations with colleagues who might be working in the same field across the globe. Then there's obviously also benefits for your own research community that you might be a part of. It's easier to actually find useful data if they are published and visible, which can then be reused in teaching or for more efficient research, or even as a basis to make new research possible on top of them. And also, of course, we cannot archive and preserve data for the future if we don't make them available. And then beyond just you and your research community, obviously the general public also benefits from doing this. So this kind of ties in with what I said about the reproducibility crisis a little bit earlier, is that if we make research results publicly available, we do increase public trust in science, since research papers and data become more verifiable and more valid that way. It also increases opportunities for citizen science, which is like a very much a growing sector lately, and it also can sometimes have economic benefits for the private sector, which is not generally a terrible thing. So yeah, this is maybe some of the benefits that you can expect if you do publish your data. Now, we'll get a bit more into the nitty-gritty of where and how to accomplish this feat of data publication. Firstly, I want to say not all data that are published are the same. There are definitely different levels of openness. So sometimes people are like, okay, there's publicly available data and then there's no data available, but that's not quite it. Because you can have different levels of openness. So we will start from the most open one first. So this would basically be a public use file. It's open to everyone. You can find it, download it, share it, etc. This is generally what we recommend, unless there are legal reasons not to. I'm not going to get into those today because this is not a legal workshop, but there are a few cases in which this might not be the best way to go. For example, if you have very sensitive data that might be personal data, or that might be data from military research, stuff like that. Or if you maybe want to work on a patent or something like that. In some cases, you might then want to have an embargoed access. So what does that mean? Embargoed access means you do make the data available on a infrastructure such as a repository online, but you put an embargo on them, which means they can only be actually seen and downloaded after a certain period of time has elapsed, like let's say 6 months or 12 months or whatever, however long you feel is necessary. Now, word of caution though, this practice of embargoing access to research results is not always allowed by all funders. So you need to check your funder guidelines, whether this is actually a thing that you are allowed to do in your project if you do want to choose this road of embargoed access. Sometimes there is also an option, depending on which infrastructure you choose to publish on, or which mode of publication you choose, that will allow you to sort of like limit your user base a little bit. And that can be either like a campus file where only people from like a certain IP range can access the data, or it could be just registered users to this infrastructure, for example. But this is relatively rare and should be like a very limited use case, actually. Then you have such a thing as closed access, or the infamous upon request. So this should be used only for very sensitive data and in very rare cases. Some repositories do provide the option to do this, to say, okay, the data are here, but not available for download or to look at for everyone. You actually have to like send me an email and I have to say, okay, yeah, you can have them. Again, this is obviously not the best for visibility. It's not the best for disseminating your results, but sometimes there are use cases where it's like legally so sensitive that it makes sense. And in some very rare cases, you might only be able to make metadata available or accessible. So basically what you would do is you would not upload any data, but you would create a record where you say, okay, these are my metadata. These data exist, but they are not publicly accessible for this and that reason. Now, a good reason, or like a good example that I have heard was people working with political refugees in war areas, in like active war zones, who said they are unable to anonymize the data in any way, shape, or form in a way that they can guarantee the safety of these political defectors without like giving too much away. And this is why they weren't able to publish them. So this could be a use case where this could apply. What's generally not an option at all is not sharing anything, not even your metadata. Like you should always at least do that. And basically, sort of like the guideline that we want to follow here is that data should be as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. Now, where can you publish? There's a number of ways that you can actually get your data out there. I just like sort of want to touch on 3 of the most common ones, and they're also kind of sorted that way, I feel. Well, maybe data supplements are a little more common, I don't care. Anyway, data repositories are very clearly like the #1 place where people generally publish their research data. And add metadata. They have a persistent identifier, you upload them. And this is what we're going to practice also in like the second part of today's workshop with Zenodo. There are, of course, many different ones. We can have a look at what kind of data repositories there are a little bit later. Now, a second possibility for data publication would be a data journal. A data journal, in opposition to like a normal scientific journal, is a journal where you don't actually post an article or publication. You actually, and these are all online and digital, of course, you actually post your actual data with all the documentation, all the description, and all of that stuff in that data journal. And the underlying data are actually deposited in a data repository and then linked to that publication in the data journal that describes your data and gives additional documentation and materials that might be affiliated with your data publication. And there's many different ones, and recent years data journals have seen quite a boom with more and more people doing this. It's definitely time consuming to prepare something like this because the standards for data publication in a journal are fairly high. But some of them do have impact factors and are fairly high ranked as well. And we've listed a few of the ones here that are well established. So that it's definitely worth considering if you have a data set that you're like, oh, wow, this is really amazing. I want to put it out there in a way like that. And a third way is sometimes when you publish an article in a scientific journal, they do ask you to give a data supplement, provide basically the data that are underpinning your publication. And then sometimes they will have their own repository where they will deposit the data and give you a DOI for it or some other identifier. Sometimes they will ask you to provide like a link or something. But this is still relatively frequent that journals ask this. And I think it's like not a terrible option, but you always have to be aware that the journal should provide you with a persistent identifier. If they don't do that, then you should self-publish in a repository. Why is maybe something that we can get into when I talk a little bit about persistent identifiers a little later. So yeah, these are like the three main ways that you can, or main places that you can publish research data. Now, a little bit more on data journals. Why should you like take the effort and publish there? Maybe. Now, of course, you shouldn't do that with all your data. This is, as I said, a bit time consuming, but they are peer-reviewed journals. So the data that do get published there have undergone some rigorous scientific examination. Some of them have an impact factor, as I already mentioned, and provide a persistent identifier for your publication. And the underlying data are published in a repository. Now, the difference between self-publishing in a data repository and publishing a data journal is obviously you're going to get more exposure. Data journals are going to be read on a regular basis, whereas the chance of like someone randomly finding your data in a data repository is comparatively lower. You can find a list of data journals if you're interested in this kind of thing with our colleagues at Uni Jena. I've put the link on the slide. So if you do want to have a look at that, it's there for you. Now, as I did say, we're going to talk a little bit more about data repositories. So what they are is basically a database in which digital objects can be documented, archived, and published. They do enhance visibility and sustainability for your data as compared to not publishing, of course, at all, via the use of a persistent identifier and a metadata, and encouraging you to describe your data a little bit more. They tend to provide also like transparent information on usage rights of the data, which is important for people who want to reuse them in any way. And they come in three varieties, broadly speaking. So you tend to have the generic data repositories, which are discipline agnostic. Anyone can publish there. It can be generally all kinds of formats. So you have the Open Science Framework one, you have Zenodo, you have Figshare. There are a few more, but these are like the three biggest ones. And anyone who cannot find a discipline specific, which would be the second category, data repository for their research will not be doing anything wrong with picking a generic one. So this is a route that you can always go. Discipline specific ones are also quite popular and have become increasingly so with the advent of our national research data infrastructure in recent years. Some of which have established discipline-specific repositories, such as NFDE for Chem, who do have Commotion. But there's like a wide variety of them. Maybe like a word of caution, no, maybe not caution, but advice on discipline-specific repositories would be that some of them are not very modern. They're not very up to date. They've been working for like 20, 25 years. There might have been something that the community sort of like programmed themselves and might not be up to the publication standards that we have today. So even though I would generally say if it is a modern, well-led infrastructure and a well-sustained infrastructure, then discipline-specific is great because they will have discipline-specific metadata standards for you. And everything will look and feel a lot more discipline-specific. Some will have viewers or other features that like a generic repository just will not have. But yeah, always with the caveat that it should be like a modern, well-maintained infrastructure. If you do pick a discipline-specific one. And then there's institutional repositories. In Thuringia, we don't have one yet, which is why I only just like put our logo there, but we're working on one right now. So institutional repositories are basically data repositories maintained and hosted by academic institutions. So it could be a university, could be it could be even like a discipline server, whatever. In Thuringia, we don't have any of them yet at our universities. We have decided that we are so small as universities that we will make one together. and hopefully we will be introducing Refodat, which is what it will be called, in the summer of this year to our researchers and also to the wider public. But there are institutional repositories at many other institutions in Germany, but also internationally and across the globe. Now, you might be asking yourself, so like, how do I go about finding one of them? Like, how do I find a data repository? And we are in the lucky position that we have a website called Re3Data, which is a registry of research data repositories with over, there's a zero missing, it's 3,000 entries, it's not 300 entries, with over 3,000 entries of data repositories. So there's a lot. Now, the value of this site is that it shows you the quality criteria available. So you can actually search for your kind of repository that you want to find, either via icons that they show for each entry or via filters, which I'm showing you here on the right-hand side. So you can filter by all sorts of things, subjects, content types, metadata standards that the repository might employ, which kind of PID systems they have, what the language is it suitable for software, all sorts of things. So this is like a nice way to sort of like filter out what you might want. And yeah, if you can't find anything there that is maybe discipline specific, as I said, you can always go with the big generic ones. Now, how to choose one. So you found one on Re3Data. Now you want to know, like, is it for me? You have to consider several things. So the first thing that I would consider is, does it provide the access option that I would like for my data? So open, closed, embargoed, we've talked about this. Do they actually provide that? Do they provide the usage and licensing options that I want? So you might want to apply a license. We're going to talk about that as well. A license to your data. Do they actually support that? Then discipline specific versus generic. We've talked about that as well. What do I want? Is there even one for my discipline or not? Usage of persistent identifiers, like very widespread is now the use of the DOI, the DOI. Some also provide others such as URN, ARC, handle, etc. Like the important thing I feel is that they do provide one at all. But I think like with most infrastructures today, you will see that they do provide a DOI at the very least. Then sometimes it might be important to you whether they offer any data curation options. This is generally the case, or more so the case, with discipline-specific repositories rather than generic ones, and whether they are sustainable in the long term. So whether they have some sort of certification or standard applied to them. And Re3Data will show you whether the repository that you have found does have a certificate or a standard applied to it that they fulfill. And then it will also show you whether the repository has a policy as to, what you can upload, what the upload file size limits are, and so on and so forth. So this might also be like an important thing to consider when you choose a repository. Now, let's say you have chosen a repository, you have your data, and you want to make it available. Another thing that you should consider before you publish is whether your data are fair. Some of you might already know what fair data are, some might not, but I'm just going to give like a little tiny bit of info about it. So FAIR is an acronym that stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, which is basically the end goal of what we want our data to be, or as much as possible. So findable means that your data are uploaded to a public repository or similar structure that provides metadata, and that they are identifiable and locatable there by a persistent identifier. Accessible means that the data are available and obtainable for download, and that even if the data themselves are restricted for some reason, the metadata is openly available. So this sort of goes back to what I said earlier. Even if you have closed access, you should at least have open metadata. Then the data should also be interoperable. So what that means is that you should allow data exchange or reuse through the use of interoperable platforms. Basically, if you pick one of the repositories that are in general used today, that will already be a thing that is fulfilled. And then they should have some sort of standardized metadata schema, your data, and ideally controlled vocabularies or ontologies that you use in your documentation. Why? Because it just makes it easier for other people to understand your data and for them to interoperate with other data. The metadata should be human readable. So this is generally the case when you look at your graphic user interface, but it should also be machine readable. So any infrastructure you publish on should expose these metadata that you put in a machine readable format. So that would be either XML or JSON or any such machine readable data formats. And then they should also be reusable. So reusable means your data should allow reuse via good documentation and clear usage license, as well as good provenance information. Provenance information just means where does your data come from and how did you obtain it. So this is like a very short run through what fair data is. Now, you might ask yourself, how do I make my data fair though? And basically what you do is you follow the fair data principles. And you remember that fair is not the same as open. So not all fair data have to be open. There are reasons to not make data open sometimes. And maybe even more importantly, not all open data are also automatically fair. So you might have an open data set lying around on a repository somewhere without, let's say, any documentation or any metadata. And that data set would not qualify as fair because it would not be reusable. Then you should, in a third step, check your relevant policies, guidelines, and funding criteria for what you actually have to do to make your data fair. So some guidelines, policies, and funders have other requests than the next one. And then you should publish data in an open access repository. So that's like the main step, obviously. And you can check whether the data that you have published or that you are going to publish are fair, or more so how fair they are, because generally with data, it's not a question of they're fair or not, they're not fair. It's generally a question of how fair can I get them to be. So you can do that by using a simple checklist, which I've linked for you here. It's basically just questions that you go through, you check them off or you don't. But you can also do it through tools. So personally, I like the AirDC Fair Self-Assessment tool that I've linked for you here, or also the automated Fuji Fair Assessment tool. Now, this one you can only really use when you already have a URL or a DOI. So when your data are already published. But it's very nice and easy to use and to see, okay, I've published, how did I do? Our network also published an overview of fair assessment tools that are available. On the graphic, there's a hyperlink to this fair assessment table and also the poster that you see here. If you want to get more into fair assessment, into checking how fair your data are, this is a good place to start. Now we're going to talk a little bit about licensing. Licensing for data is a little bit tricky, but first maybe let's talk about what it is. A license is a usage contract through which the copyright holder allows the contract partner to use their data in a number of ways. So that this could be activities such as copying, saving, storing, changing, amending, republishing the data in question. This necessarily only applies for publications that actually do fall under copyright law. You don't need a license for things that don't actually fall under the copyright. And this is the case for a lot of research data, for example, like plain measurement data that come in a table out of a machine. will not necessarily fall under the copyright, but some research data do. Again, we're not going to go into too much legal detail. If you do want to know about copyright and research data, there's a lot of material either on forschungsdaten.info or also on our website in our materials where you can have a look. With licensing, the same thing that I said earlier applies as well. Your license should be as open as possible and as closed as necessary, or as restrictive as necessary. And there are a number of licensing schemes that are available to license research data. So one of them is Creative Commons. A number of you might have already heard of it. It's as the name said, commonly used, fairly international, and you can also use it for text, not just research data, or any publications such as presentations and so on and so forth. And I've sort of like organized this table by restrictiveness. So the one on the left are the most restrictive, one on the right are the most open licenses in the scheme. So the most restrictive with Creative Commons would be no derivatives, where you're not allowed to change the data in any way if you're going to republish them, as well as non-commercial, which means you're not allowed to use these data for any purpose that is in any way commercial, even partially. Then you have sort of like a copyleft condition, which is a little bit more open. In Creative Commons, this would be the CC BY share alike, which means that if you do want to use the data, you have to share them under the same open license, under the same openness conditions that you found them in, or at least like a similar license that has the same openness conditions. Then more to the right of the closed open scale, we have attribution, which in Creative Commons would be CC BY. That basically means you can do pretty much anything with the data as long as you attribute the author that they came from, that originated the data set. And in Creative Commons, you also can waive your copyright altogether. This is technically not legally possible in the EU because you cannot waive copyright. You have it forever. But in the license agreement, basically it says you're waiving your copyright if you use CC0. Now, anything that's sort of like right of the middle, this like green line in the middle, is something that I would say, okay, yeah, that has a use case for research data. I could recommend that. Anything to the left, I wouldn't really recommend. You also see the other two licensing schemes, Open Data Commons and Community Data License Agreement, do not even have any of the more restrictive options. So Open Data Commons, for example, has a copyleft option for database content, and also an attribution option, which is ODC BY. And they also have an option for waiving copyright altogether, which is like a public use condition. And then the Community Data License Agreement scheme has a copyleft, which is very similar to the Creative Commons share alike condition, as well as a more permissive one, which is sort of similar to an attribution license, only that CDLA does not require you to share the author, but the license conditions of the licensing agreement. So like these is like some sort of licensing schemes that you could use to apply to your research data. Not all of them will be available in all research data infrastructures or research data repositories, but these are like good options that we can recommend for use. Now, if you're not sure what to use, you can always go with like either Creative Commons or Open Data Commons, but these are only available for research data and do not include research software. If you want to know more about licenses for research software, we have got a 23 research data management things edition free licenses. And one of the focus topics in this handout is licenses for research software. So if you're interested in that, I've put a hyperlink on it on the graphic. And when you get the slides, you can just have a little look at that. I'm just not going to get into any detail there. There's a few advantages of using Creative Commons. Basically, it's a standardized license agreement. You have legal certainty when you use it. You don't have to waive your usage rights. Researchers can so still continue working on their data, even when applying this license. And it's internationally compatible. It works across several jurisdictions. So, anyone working with like American colleagues or Australian colleagues doesn't have to worry about whether this is universally applicable. And here I have given you the Creative Commons licenses, again, with like the text of what you may be allowed to do. The first three in the red box is basically what I think would be acceptable use cases for research data. And the top one is in the green little frame is the one that I would recommend for most cases. So that's the CC0. Okay. Concluding this like license topic, I have like 5 recommendations real quick because I see I'm already over my time. CC0 is advisable when it's doubtful whether copyright protection even exists for your data, as well as for metadata and for quantitative research data. CC BY 4.0 is fast becoming the established standard for any kind of other research data. Use non-commercial very carefully, as I said, and the same goes for non-derivative. It will reduce the visibility of your work since it limits the use cases for other users that will want to work maybe with your data or do something with it. So these two use very sparingly. There is a selection tool if you're still unsure which one would be good for you that you can use as well. And the EU and the DFG do recommend publishing research data under a CC BY 4.0 license. Why 4.0? Because the lower versions of the CC BY license do not include data as an acceptable use case for CC BY. Now, a little bit about persistent identifiers. I think we've heard a lot of it already. It's a permanent digital link consisting of numbers or strings of alphanumerical signs and point directly to a digital object rather than to its location online, unlike just a URL. Most frequently used systems are the DOI or the URN, and the most frequently used author systems, so there are PIDs for authors as well, Publons, which is formerly Researcher ID, Google Scholar ID, and ORCID. If you do encounter a DOI, for example, you will have to run it through a DOI resolver, because if it's not a target URL but a proper DOI, it will not resolve in a normal browser. I want to talk a little bit about ORCID before we break very soon. Why you should get an ORCID. So an ORCID persists even if you change your name, your institution, your discipline, and it enhances visibility of your research output by you creating a profile that all of your publications, your data, etc. are on. It gathers all these research results in one place, and it is free of charge and non-profit, and you can register for one in under 5 minutes, doesn't take a lot of time, and then you can put your personal PID with all your publications. I can just very highly recommend it for all and any of you. Now, we're going to have a 15-minute break, and then we will be back with the part on how to increase the impact and visibility of the data that you have now hopefully published. So, ways to make your data publication more visible and impactful. I've just numbered like a few, and I'm not going to go in super detail about it. But I think like if you do a little bit of your own research, you will find ways to like accomplish this. So first, what you want to do is check your visibility. Both you as an author and your research publications have a certain degree of visibility online, which is, let's be real, that's what counts these days. So how you do this is first, if you don't have a Google Scholar account yet, yes, I know a lot of people are not a fan of Google, and I myself also not a great fan. However, there is no way of getting around the fact that Google Scholar is extremely impactful in academia. So if you don't have one yet, you should probably create a Google Scholar account. and a citation profile. Because both of these things, creating the account as well as having a citation profile, I've kind of like screenshotted it here on the right, what that would look like, up your citation count, because they make your stuff more visible. Then you want to check whether you actually have a profile on the citation database service called Scopus. So Scopus is a citation database that sort of provides information about how many citations your research publications have, and that includes data publications, of course. And even if you think, oh, I've never signed up with Scopus, I don't have a profile, as soon as they have one of your publications, you do. Now, you do want to go check your Scopus profile and see whether it's actually accurate. Does it have like your accurate name, your accurate affiliation? Does it have all of the publications that you do want, and is it up to date? That will also greatly increase your visibility. And then as a third thing that you could do to check and increase your visibility is you want to run a cited reference search for your publications on the citation database service called Web of Science. So this is a similar service to Scopus, just from a different company, of course. This is Clarivate, Scopus is Elsevier. And if your publications do not show up in Web of Science for some reason, you can add them manually, or you can do an identifier import. So you can either use your ORCID profile to do this, or you can use the DOI of your data publication and add that to your Web of Science profile. Now, with Web of Science, you don't have an automatic profile. They don't automatically create one for you. You will have to create one if you want to do this, but it's not generally something that takes a lot of time. So these are like 3 methods that you can use to sort of like check your visibility and increase it a little bit on the internet for you and your research data publications. Now, another thing that we've spoken about is your personal identifier, your ORCID. This is important because ORCID is basically your calling card, your academic calling card online. And you can tweak the visibility and the impact that your ORCID and your ORCID profile have, and by extension, the impact that you have as an author online through a few things. So the first thing you can do is a visibility check on ORCID to make sure that your profile is not set to only me. They've introduced these like different openness options a little while ago, and not everyone might have noticed that they did. So you can run the visibility check and see which settings on ORCID and on your ORCID profile are set to only me. And you want to set it to either trusted parties or everyone. Everyone is, of course, best for visibility, but there might be some settings that you don't want to do that, and you can set it to trusted parties at least. Only me doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that's one thing you can do. And then you can create connections in your ORCID profile as well. So how you do that is you add trusted funders that have funded your research, for example. You add employers, so definitely your most recent one would be a good idea. And then you can allow them, by making them a preferred source, like you see here in the screenshot, you can allow them to add things to your profile. So for example, if they're like, oh, here's this publication that you have with us, it's not yet on your profile, they can add it without asking permission. Obviously, you only want to do that with like trusted institutions and funding agencies and so on. But it is a good way to like enrich your profile and make all of your publications visible. Now, it's still a little bit tedious to do it like that, just as it is tedious to add to your ORCID profile by hand. Now, if you don't want to do that, ORCID's got you covered. There's another option that you can do and that you should enable. This is automatic updates to your profile from trusted organizations such as Crossref or your home institution. So for many organizations, you will be able to enable automatic updates that they can just sort of like play into your profile with like all like the publications, the results, and the articles that do not yet show up there. I highly recommend doing that because I don't know when I've last updated my ORCID profile. So I'm like one of those who preach, water, but like in secret I drink wine, which means I'm lazy. So I highly recommend doing these automatic updates. So basically you go to this ORCID dialog and then you can authorize access for certain organizations such as Crossref to do these updates. So that's another way that you can put your data publications out there via your ORCID profile. It can do a lot more things than most people think. Now, you also want to improve your metrics. And what I mean by metrics is the way that you're counted and cited and visible on like search engines and on the internet itself, specifically on academic search engines. So what you want to do is, firstly, we've talked about this, you want to publish open access. That's the first thing, because obviously any search engines will find you a lot better and your research a lot better if it's openly available. You want to link as many of your research results, so your articles, your data, your supplementary materials, any like GitHub repo that you might have with research software that's linked to your stuff. You want to link them all together as much as you can. So many infrastructures like Zenodo do provide in the metadata, in the bibliographical metadata, provide fields to do this, to add references and links. I will show you how to do this later on in the sandbox, but you should do that wherever you can. Then also what will improve your metrics is some very simple stuff. So using one consistent version of your name, studies show that the preferred scheme or method of doing this is last name, comma, first name. This is like the preferred convention because it's the least ambiguous. So if you give your name and if the infrastructure lets you, you should always do it in the same way. It doesn't really so much matter how, but that you do it consistently. And the same is true for the consistent standard spelling of your affiliated institution. You should always use it the same way because machines have an easier time finding you that way. And computers are machines. So we want to make it as easy for them as we possibly can. When you do publish data in research data repository, you want to write a detailed abstract. So Zenodo gives you the option to write a description, an abstract of your data set. You definitely want to do that. I see way too many data publications without that. And it's very important that you include the keywords and information for the data that you're publishing in the first 2 sentences. Why? Because research results are often displayed with the abstract shortened to 1 or 2 sentences. And if you have your keywords and information in these 2 sentences, people are a lot more likely to actually click on those results and look at them. And then what you also want to do, and this is more for computers rather than for the human looking at your results, is you want to include your keywords in your abstract at least 3 to 6 times, because that increases the likelihood of a computer finding your research and with like keywords that people might search in Google Scholar or in Google search engine or on other search engines. So these are some ways to like improve the metrics and the way you can be found and seen online and on different like search engines and such. Then you also want to enrich your metadata and your documentation. We've talked a little bit about metadata. So metadata is basically the data that describe your data set that you're publishing. You want to fill in as many metadata fields in the graphic user interface of the data repository that you are using as you possibly can. And you want to make them as detailed and as specific as the infrastructure allows you to do. So this is what we call bibliographic metadata. There's 2 kinds. This one's bibliographic. And basically, the data repository that you use will sort of already give you a mask of what to fill in. How specific you can make it is oftentimes up to you. But yeah, it depends on which infrastructure you're using. Additionally, you might want to consider uploading a metadata file with discipline-specific metadata. So metadata that are only specific to like your particular discipline or this particular data set. Like, I don't know, some people, archaeologists, might want to have geodata in their metadata, whereas this is totally irrelevant for other disciplines. Now, these metadata files should be like in an XML or JSON format, ideally, but also in like a human readable form, maybe in the documentation or somewhere else. So this will make your data a lot more usable for people who come from your field, because they will know exactly what the parameters of your research were. Then you want to find suitable metadata standards for that, and you can do that on fairsharing.org. Like, if you don't already have an established metadata standard that you do follow, you can search right there with different filters and so on, whether there's one that you might want to use. If you cannot find one that seems good for your kind of research, you can use the predefined schema.org dataset type standard. So I put the link there. That's basically just a metadata template that has like metadata that are applicable to data rather than other types of publications. And then you also want to add complete and detailed documentation to the data that you upload in a README, a PDF, or whatever like way of documenting comes like most naturally to you, is better than no documentation at all. Now, I do not have the time here to specify exactly what should be in the documentation and how you should do it, but do not fear. We had an entire Thuringian RDM days focused specifically on this one topic, and I put the link to that page and all the materials that we had, all the audio recordings and presentation slides that we had during these RDM days on this slide. So you can just click on that and basically get so much information about data documentation that you never want to hear about it again. So that's another way of increasing the impact of your, so this is not so much about visibility, this is about impact of your research, because people, if you do all of this, will read it more, they will cite it more, and they will use it more. Now, to make up for having less time before, we're kind of already done with the impact and visibility part. But what I would like to suggest now is, before we go to another break, and then sort of to the practical part of the workshop, is that the ones of you who do not yet have a Zenodo account, please go to sandbox.zenodo.org and do sign up. Use the sign up button, create a little account, takes about 5 minutes. And also, if you don't have one yet, consider signing up for your ORCID at orchid.org/register. It's also really quick, and we can then use the ORCID while we practice to actually put into like the Zenodo sandbox and show you how all of that works. Also, Kevin will post the link to 2 data sets that we have prepared for you that you can download in the chat. Now, if you don't have your own data that you want to use for this practical exercise, you can just download these and sort of like follow along. I will be using those same ones, but you can also use your own. There are questions, I've been told. Okay. Yeah, since I did say we will do questions after the input part, let's go to questions now. Let me see. At what point of time would you recommend to publish research data, the raw data, not the metadata? The data is the gold of your research, and you probably put much money, effort, and work into it to gain it, though you don't want to give them away for free. Yeah, no, I do get that. So most funders recommend that you do a data publication at the latest at the end of your project. Now, if that's still too early for you because you're kind of still working on a follow-up project, or you're working on a patent or something like that, you can do what I suggested earlier, maybe have an embargoed access. But I think like the end of the project is like a standard point in time to do a data publication. Some do it earlier because they're like, yeah, you know what, the earlier the stuff is out there, the better, because then it'll get more views and more citations already. But like end of project is like the standard time, I feel. Hope that answers the question. Now we have another question. Do you know if data published in data journals are considered as publications on equal basis as original or review papers during evaluation of researchers for funding? I think probably that is supposed to say. What role does the title play in findability of data? The title actually does play a big role. So let me answer that question first. Because people are more apt to click on concise, short, but catchy titles that contain keywords that they're likely to search for. Because if they search for certain keyword, you know how Google works. You search for certain keyword, and then if the title contains that keyword, that will be on top of the page. So yeah, it is worth thinking about a little bit, but of course I can't give like any specific rules for, because disciplines are all different. And then as to your questions about the data journals, I don't want to lie, so I'm not exactly sure whether it is considered on this equal basis as a original like publication or review paper, because it also depends on the funder. Some funders consider all of these publications on equal footing. Some funders don't consider data publication yet at all. So I don't think there's really like one way to answer this. But what I will say is that data publications will become more and more important with all funders as time goes on, even the ones that might not yet really have a metric to consider it. Okay, then I see there's a question. Is it necessary to drop the keywords 3 to 6 times in the abstract when you already have got additional keywords in normalized vocabulary? No, if you already have it in like an actual vocabulary that's machine readable, then yeah, that's fine. You still can't go wrong to drop it like a couple times in the abstract just for like the humans that might be reading it. And then what should we look out for in repository certifications? And how do I actually apply ontologies to my data? Okay, so maybe let's start with the first question that you had, repository certifications. So basically, there are two main ones if you're sort of working in a Germanic environment, which we are. So there's the Core Trust Seal, which is a certification or like a standard for repositories. And you will be able to see on the re3 data page when you find the repository that it's there, and repositories, if they have it, will also generally display it on their site. And then there is the Dini Nestor certificate, which is like a German certificate for certifying infrastructures like repositories. So these two, I think, are like the main ones that you should look out for. And then your second question, how do I actually apply ontologies to my data? So I'm not exactly sure what you're asking here. But first, you basically have to either find an ontology that works for your data, that describes your data well, or you have to create like an ontology. The NFDI hosts a terminology service. Maybe one of my co-hosts can find the link to the terminology service at the TIB Hannover, where you can search for these kinds of controlled vocabularies and ontologies and see whether there is one that that fits your research. Incidentally, our coffee lecture series next semester, in the summer semester, will deal with basically all things ontology. So if you want, just sort of like follow us on our social media, and then we'll post about our coffee lectures and so on regularly, and you can just maybe have a little peek in there and see what's what. I'm asking about the interoperability side. When I have an ontology, what then? Oh, okay, yeah. So if you have an ontology, you basically want to include it in your documentation, which means whatever documentation you have, you just want to add either a link to the ontology that you're using if it's already established and online, or you want to be like, by the way, here's the ontology or vocabulary that I've created for this data set, and it works like this. And then you put it in your documentation. Okay, I think I've got all the questions. I'm so happy that you have questions and that I seem to be able to answer them. But I think now we will actually, if there's no more questions, we will actually go to break, and then I'll see you then. And we'll start doing some uploading and some publishing. Well, not really, but we'll practice.